The town of Black Hollow lay nestled in the shadow of the mountains, a quiet place where strangers rarely lingered. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the cold autumn wind rattled the trees. It was the kind of town where people knew each other's names, where the crunch of boots on gravel was more familiar than the hum of car engines. Sarah Donovan had lived here her whole life. She worked at the local garage, hands perpetually stained with oil, and never backed down from a challenge, whether it was fixing a stubborn transmission or shutting down some out-of-towner with an attitude. Her brother, Ethan, was even less sociable. He kept to himself, patrolling the woods like a restless predator. People said he was strange, always watching, always listening. But Sarah knew the truth. Ethan wasn't just her brother. He was something more. The sun had nearly set when the stranger arrived. He stepped into the garage just as Sarah was tightening the last bolt on an old Chevy. It had propped open like a yawning beast. She didn't look up at first. Customers were common, especially lost hikers who needed directions back to civilization. But the moment he spoke, she felt something was off. "You work here." The voice was smooth, too controlled, like someone imitating human speech rather than feeling it. Sarah wiped her hands on a rag and glanced up. The man, if he could be called that, stood too still. His skin was a little too perfect, his eyes an unnatural shade of silver blue. Dressed in a dark coat, he might have passed for a businessman, but there was something about him that felt wrong. "Obviously," she replied, tossing the rag onto the counter. "Need a tow or just lost?" The stranger tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "I'm looking for something. Or rather, someone." Sarah folded her arms, masking the unease creeping up her spine. "Not sure I can help with that." The man stepped closer. Too close. "Oh, I think you can." It was then that she caught the scent. Faint but distinct. Metallic, like hot wires burning. Not sweat, not cologne, but something alien. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. "You should leave," she said flatly. "I don't do business with creeps." A slow smile crept across his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Creep? That's an interesting word." Before she could reply, he moved. One moment he was standing near the counter. The next he was in front of her, fingers curling around her wrist. A grip like iron. Too fast. Too strong. A sharp pain shot through her arm, but she gritted her teeth, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "You have spirit," he mused. "That's rare." Sarah wrenched her arm free and took a step back, reaching for the wrench on the workbench. The man's expression barely changed, but there was amusement flickering in those cold eyes. A predator toying with its prey. And then a deep, rumbling growl. Sarah's breath caught. The sound didn't come from the stranger. It came from outside. The man stiffened, his head turning slightly. A shadow moved beyond the garage's open bay door, massive and silent. The air changed, electric, charged with something primal. Then Ethan stepped into the light. He was still in his human form, but barely. His broad shoulders seemed to strain against the limits of his skin, and his eyes, once a deep hazel brown, were now glowing amber. His stance was deceptively relaxed, but Sarah knew the truth. He was seconds away from tearing something apart. "You got a problem?" Ethan's voice was low, calm in a way that was far more dangerous than shouting. The stranger turned fully to face him, and for the first time, something flickered in those unnatural eyes. Not fear, curiosity. Ethan took another step forward, blocking the path between Sarah and the stranger. "Leave," Ethan said, his voice a low growl. The silver-eyed man chuckled. "I was just introducing myself." Ethan didn't blink. "You've done that. Now go." For a long moment, neither moved. Sarah's fingers tightened around the wrench, her pulse hammering in her ears. She had seen Ethan fight before. She had seen him change. But she had never seen him this still, this focused, like a wolf watching its prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. The stranger smiled again, But this time it was different. "I'll see you again," he said. And then, just like that, he turned and walked away. Sarah exhaled slowly as the tension broke. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been gripping the wrench until she felt the dull ache in her fingers. Ethan didn't move until the stranger had disappeared into the night. Only then did he turn to Sarah, his glowing eyes fading back to human. "You okay?" Sarah flexed her wrist where the man had grabbed her. "Yeah." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He's not human. I know." He looked toward the road, where the stranger had gone, his expression unreadable. "He'll be back." Sarah didn't doubt it. And when he came, he wouldn't be the only predator waiting. The night air hung thick with tension, the town of Black Hollow settling into uneasy silence. Street lamps buzzed dimly, casting long shadows over cracked pavement. Inside the garage, Sarah and Ethan remained still, both of them listening, waiting. "He'll be back," Sarah said, flexing her fingers, the dull ache in her wrist a reminder of the stranger's unnatural strength. Ethan didn't respond. His jaw was set, his eyes locked on the road where the man had vanished. He had sensed it immediately. Something was off about him, something not of this world. And Ethan had spent enough time in the wilderness to know when a predator was testing its prey. Finally, he exhaled. "I need to track him." Sarah turned to him sharply. "Alone?" Ethan's muscles tensed. The change was still just beneath the surface, his body thrumming with the urge to shift, to hunt. But that wasn't the plan. Not yet. "I'll be fine," he muttered. Sarah hesitated, but she knew there was no arguing. If Ethan was going after someone, there was no stopping him. "Just don't get yourself killed," she said, grabbing her jacket. Ethan gave her a half-smirk. "Not planning on it." The scent was easy to pick up, metallic, sharp, unnatural. It wasn't a human scent, and it sure as hell wasn't anything from around here. Ethan followed it out of town, down an old road where the streetlights faded and the trees grew thick and dark. The wind whispered through the branches, the cold biting at his skin. His breathing slowed as he moved, his senses sharpening. He wasn't fully shifted yet, but his instincts were already pulling him closer to the hunt. Then he heard it, a voice, low, murmuring, unfamiliar. Ethan crouched behind a thick tree trunk, peering through the underbrush. There, in a clearing, stood the stranger. He wasn't alone. A second figure stood with him, taller, broader, its form shifting slightly in the moonlight. Another one. Ethan narrowed his eyes. He had suspected the man wasn't human, but this confirmed it. The way they moved, the way their skin seemed too smooth, their limbs just slightly off, they weren't from here. The first stranger, the one who had confronted Sarah, was speaking in a language Ethan didn't recognize. The words came out in sharp, clicking tones, their meaning lost to him. But the intent, that was clear. They were planning something. Ethan's muscles coiled. He could wait. He could track them, learn their movements. Or he could make sure they never got the chance. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he stepped forward. The moment his boot crushed a fallen branch, both figures went rigid, heads snapping toward the sound. For a brief second, silence hung between them. Then the first stranger, the one who had grabbed Sarah, smirked. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said in perfect English. Ethan stepped fully into the moonlight, his expression unreadable. "You should have kept wondering." The taller one moved then, shifting slightly, and in an instant Ethan saw what they really were. The illusion of humanity flickered, like a ripple in water. For a fraction of a second, their true forms emerged, elongated limbs, skin too smooth, eyes too large and black. And just as quickly, the disguise returned. Ethan's pulse remained steady. He had seen worse things in the wild. The first stranger, who was clearly in charge, tilted his head. "You're not like the others in this town." Ethan's lips curled slightly. "Neither are you." The alien chuckled. "You're observant, but observation alone won't save you." Ethan didn't answer. His fingers twitched at his sides, muscles bracing. He could hear their heartbeats, too slow, too measured. They weren't afraid. That was their first mistake. The second one moved first. It was fast, but Ethan was faster. The moment the creature lunged, he shifted. His bones cracked, stretching, reshaping. Fur erupted from his skin, claws extending as his vision sharpened to a predator's clarity. He barely felt the change. It was as natural as breathing. The alien had clearly expected a fight, but it hadn't expected this. Ethan was on it in a flash, his claws raking across its chest. A spray of black ichor splattered the ground. The creature let out a strangled, inhuman screech, stumbling backward, clutching its wound. The leader's smirk vanished. Interesting, Ethan didn't give him time to react. He lunged, his massive form barreling toward the stranger. But before he could strike, something hit him, hard. A force, invisible and crushing, slammed into his chest, sending him skidding across the clearing. Pain flared through his ribs, but he rolled to his feet, eyes locked on the leader. The alien lowered his hand, his silver blue eyes gleaming. Now that's more like it. Ethan bared his fangs. You have no idea what you've just started. The leader smiled. Neither do you. The second alien, still clutching its bleeding chest, snarled something in that strange, clicking language. The leader nodded once before turning back to Ethan. This isn't over. Ethan let out a low, guttural snarl. No, it's not. And then, just like before, they disappeared into the shadows, their movements eerily silent. Ethan didn't chase them. Not yet. He stood there for a moment, listening to the wind, to the sound of his own breathing. Then, slowly, he shifted back. Bones cracked, muscles shrank, fur receded. He exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders as he wiped the alien blood off his hands. They had underestimated him. That was their second mistake. He turned, heading back toward town. Sarah needed to know what was coming. Ethan moved swiftly through the dense woods, his senses attuned to the shifting night. The scent of alien blood still clung to his skin, a bitter, metallic stench that refused to fade. His muscles burned from the fight, but the pain only sharpened his focus. He had seen their true forms. He had wounded one of them. Now, they would be watching him as much as he was hunting them. When he reached the outskirts of town, he slowed, scanning the streets. Black Hollow was quiet, but not the comforting kind of quiet. This was an unnatural stillness, the kind that signaled something watching from the darkness. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting weak, trembling beams of yellow. Sarah was waiting on the front porch, arms crossed, a baseball bat resting against the railing. "You're bleeding," she said as he approached. Ethan glanced down. Deep scratches marred his side where the alien had struck him, but the wounds were already closing. He shrugged. "It's nothing." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "You found them. I did more than that." He stepped onto the porch, lowering his voice. "They're not just passing through, Sarah. They're planning something. They weren't afraid of me. Not really." Sarah tensed, gripping the railing. "Then we make them afraid." Ethan gave her a sharp nod. "We will." He turned, eyes scanning the empty street. He could feel them out there, lurking, watching. This wasn't over. Not even close. "We need to find them before they make their next move," he muttered. Sarah grabbed her jacket. "Then let's go." Together, they moved through the back streets, avoiding the main roads where prying eyes might slow them down. Ethan led the way, following the alien scent like a bloodhound. The deeper they went into the outskirts of town, the stronger it became. Then they saw it. At the far edge of an abandoned lumberyard, an unnatural glow pulsed from within a cluster of trees. Faint, eerie, like the heartbeat of something massive and unseen. Ethan clenched his fists. "That's them." Sarah exhaled slowly. "How many?" "2 for sure. Maybe more." Sarah set her jaw. "Then let's not waste time." They moved in closer, sticking to the shadows. The glow became brighter, illuminating the ground in a sickly blue hue. Voices murmured in that strange, clicking language, low and rhythmic. Ethan signaled for Sarah to stop as they reached a rusted-out truck for cover. Peering over the edge, he saw them. The same two from earlier, standing near a small, hovering device that pulsed with energy. The injured one still clutched its chest where Ethan had torn into it. The leader, however, stood tall, his silver-blue eyes scanning the darkness as if he already knew they were there. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to move, to strike before they had a chance to react. But the leader spoke first, his voice calm, almost amused. "I was expecting you." Sarah stiffened beside Ethan. The alien turned his gaze toward their hiding spot. "You can come out now." Ethan growled low in his throat, stepping forward, Sarah right behind him. "You're making a mistake staying here." The leader smirked. "I disagree." The injured alien hissed something in its native tongue, shifting its stance as if ready to attack. Ethan saw its hands twitch, its claws flex. The leader raised a hand, stopping it. "Not yet," he murmured. Then, looking at Ethan, he tilted his head. "You're different. Not quite human. Not quite beast. Something in between." Ethan held his ground. "And you're a dead man walking." The alien chuckled. "You think so?" Before Ethan could react, the alien lifted his hand, and the world around them shifted. The air rippled, warping like heat rising from pavement. A wave of invisible energy crashed into Ethan and Sarah, sending them stumbling backward. Ethan hit the ground hard, his ears ringing. He forced himself up, blinking through the haze. Sarah was beside him, dazed but breathing. The leader's smirk widened. "Your strength is impressive, but strength alone won't save you." Ethan wiped blood from his lip. "I don't need saving." The injured alien took a step forward, its patience wearing thin. "Enough talk," it snarled. "Let's finish this." Ethan tensed, ready to shift, ready to tear them apart. But before he could make his move, something changed. The air grew heavier, charged with something primal. A presence. The aliens felt it too. Their expressions shifted from arrogance to confusion, then something close to fear. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through the trees. Low, threatening. Ethan turned his head slightly, lips curling into a smirk. They weren't alone anymore. Something else had joined the hunt. A low growl vibrated through the air, thick with raw menace. The aliens stiffened, their silver-blue eyes darting toward the tree-lean. Something ancient and relentless had turned its gaze upon them. Ethan felt it too, a primal call surging through his bones, sharpening his senses. The moment had come. The leader of the aliens lifted his chin, his confidence faltering for the first time. "You brought more of your kind?" he asked, voice tight with wariness. Ethan's lips curled back, revealing sharp canines. "No," he rolled his shoulders as his muscles stretched and contorted. "You just made the mistake of stepping into my territory." The transformation was seamless. His spine cracked, his limbs stretched, and thick fur erupted across his skin. In mere seconds, Ethan was no longer a man. He was a beast, a nightmare given flesh. His glowing amber eyes locked onto the alien leader, and he bared his fangs. The injured alien reacted first, lunging forward with a snarl, its claws extended. But Ethan was faster. He ducked under the swipe and sprang upward, slamming his massive clawed hand into the alien's chest. Bone cracked beneath the impact, and the creature let out a strangled gasp before Ethan drove his other claw straight through its throat. The alien collapsed, its silver blood pooling onto the forest floor. The leader took a step back, his arrogant smirk long gone. His hands twitched as energy crackled around his fingers. "Impressive," he admitted, "but power alone doesn't win wars." Ethan snarled, dropping to all fours. The earth trembled beneath him as he leaped, closing the distance in a heartbeat. But the alien was ready. A pulse of energy exploded outward, slamming into Ethan midair and sending him crashing into a rusted-out truck. Metal groaned as the vehicle crumpled under the force of his body. Sarah shouted something, but Ethan barely registered it. Pain flared through his ribs, but it was distant, drowned out by the primal rage coursing through his veins. He rose slowly, shaking off the debris, his breath coming in heavy, feral puffs. The alien smirked again, but this time there was tension behind it. He knew. He had to know. Ethan wasn't finished. You think brute force is enough? The alien lifted both hands, and the air warped. Shadows coiled unnaturally around him, bending and shifting as his form seemed to split and multiply. Illusions. Ethan's ears twitched. Clever, but illusions didn't have heartbeats. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, tuning out the distractions. There, the real one stood slightly to the left of center. With a snarl, Ethan lunged, his claws slicing through the nearest figure. It flickered and vanished. Another strike, another illusion gone. The alien barely had time to react before Ethan pivoted and struck true, claws raking across his chest. The leader staggered back, silver blood dripping from his wounds. Ethan didn't let him finish. He slammed into the alien, knocking him to the ground. Teeth found flesh, and the alien let out a strangled cry as Ethan's fangs tore into his shoulder. The air rippled again, but this time, it wasn't an attack. It was desperation. The alien leader's form flickered, shifting between dimensions, trying to phase away. Ethan's grip tightened. "Oh no," he growled, voice guttural and raw. "You don't get to run." The alien screamed as Ethan ripped into him, the sound echoing through the silent lumberyard. Then, silence. Ethan rose, blood dripping from his fangs, his breath ragged. The body at his feet was still, lifeless. The fight was over. Sarah stepped forward cautiously, her expression unreadable. "Is it done?" Ethan exhaled, letting the beast recede, his body shrinking back to human form. He wiped the blood from his mouth and nodded. "Yeah." Sarah glanced at the alien corpses. "They'll send more, won't they?" Ethan looked toward the sky, where the faintest glimmer of unnatural light still flickered in the atmosphere. "Probably." He turned back to her, a smirk ghosting across his lips. "Let them." Sarah returned his smirk, gripping the bat at her side. "Next time I want to turn." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "You're insane." Sarah shrugged. "Runs in the family." The night settled once more, the unnatural stillness replaced by the familiar sounds of wind rustling through the trees. For now, Black Hollow belonged to them again. But Ethan knew better than to let his guard down. The hunt never truly ended.